Futures are pretty much flat this afternoon on Sunday. This is September 9th. Following Friday's crazy day where we actually saw three intraday sell-offs on news. The first one came after the jobs number. The second one came after there was more talk of tariffs and additional tariffs. I think 267 billion. And then the final sell-off, intraday sell-off, occurred when Apple stated that they were going to be affected, or there was news, and I think the company confirmed it as well, that their products would be affected by this next wave of tariffs. So, the whole thing is getting a little bit crazy, and of course that creates crazy action in the market. And there isn't a lot of what I would call strongly trending action. A lot of things are very choppy, and I'm just looking around for things that might be setting up, and I want to go with something if the market finds its feet and this whole tariff thing sort of blows over. My guess is it's not. So I'm also looking at things in terms of breakdowns where they might occur. I mean, we saw something like a workday after earnings breaking down, and it's still holding up above the breakout point here. But you had a short break off the peak, and you're now trading below the 20-day line. So the question is, does this become a short here using the 20-day line or the highs of Friday as a selling guide, or actually an upside stop, I should say? Or is this thing going to turn around and head back up to the highs? It's very tricky to figure out. But if you look at the other names in the same space, the other cloud software names, you have Salesforce is hanging along the top of a consolidation here, and so it's really holding this breakout here that didn't occur on very heavy volume, but it was a 5-day pocket pivot preceded by a regular 10-day pocket pivot. So you got some heavy selling after earnings here and heavy selling here, and then you kind of dry up in here and you drift back above the 20-day line. You're holding the breakout point. So the question here that I'm looking at in terms of finding an answer in the action this week is whether the breakout holds, in which case this is a buy here along the 20-day line using that as your selling guide, or do we bust and you get some short sale setups that are essentially late stage breakout failures. If we look at this one, data, this is another one, and you can see here you have a pocket pivot on Thursday, and this is really trying to break out of a little funky cup with it. You could call a little cup with a little teeny tiny handle here. It's kind of a short one, but they can work. I mean, I don't really pay that much attention to what bases look like on weekly charts. I stick to the daily charts, which is, in my view, in a market like this, that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And I think that's where you find your long setup. So you hold the 10-day line on the pullback here, you hold it here, and here again, 3 days in a row. So it is getting support when it comes in. Every time the market gets tagged on an intraday sell-off after the president tweets something about tariffs or evil trading partners all over the world, like Japan and Europe and Canada and everybody, and it's holding up. So you might look at this, pull back to the 10-day line. You might think about possibly buying that. And where does that come into play? If I pull up my handy-dandy little window here, we can see that's at 110.90, and the stock closed at 113.90, a couple of percent higher. So you could set an alert down there under 111 and see if it triggers, and if it is, then maybe this becomes a buy there. Now, let's say these get into some trouble and start to break down. Well, then you're going to have a late stage breakout failure. And if you look at the weekly charts on some of these, they've been going for a while. So yeah, they could become late stage failures, but you don't really know that yet. So all you can do is go with what you're seeing in real time. So that said, it's really a matter of seeing how these play out. So you can see Splunk here also. This is a base breakout on a viable gap up type move, and it ran up and it's coming back in. So it's not really going anywhere, at least not significantly higher. And you're kind of floating around in here along the 10-day line, and I guess maybe if you pulled back closer to the top of the base, which is what it did on Thursday, I guess, and it held. So I don't know if this is going to hold up. If it breaks, obviously that becomes a late stage failure. So you've got things that you could look at as two-sided situations in this group. ServiceNow, same thing. You have a breakout here on strong volume. I'll call this a breakout, trend line breakout. So nice trend line, but you get the idea. And you can see you run up a little bit, but you pull back and you break with Workday. When Workday broke, this thing broke. And this actually was a nice little trade on the short side if you're watching this, because it opened flat. And I saw Workday was down pretty good on the opening, and so this thing just followed suit and broke. So if you look for things like that, if another stock in the group is getting tagged and another key, say cousin stock, like I would say ServiceNow is a close cousin to Workday, which is a close cousin to Salesforce. If one of them is breaking, then maybe the other one will break too in this position. But it ends up finding support along the 20-day line and roughly the top of this trendline breakout. So I'll draw the line really thick so you can see that it did get support in that big, thick black cloud there. But, it's hanging in there. Volume is lighter, and you're sort of on a re-breakout. So do you buy it here? I guess you could do that if you wanted to. But we'll see how this plays out. So, and let's see if Zendesk is another one of these application software names, and it's actually holding up. Do you guys recall I talked about this one in here when it was cited? So it's moved up, but it's acting okay. So the thing is, you've got some names breaking down. You saw the semiconductors just get ripped apart this past week. Micron, even KLAC, KLA10 Core, which is one I talked about last week. I was looking at these and thinking maybe they would, maybe this would try to turn on an undercut and rally type move through this low, but didn't happen. So once it breaks that low, then you can look at it as a short. And some of these became very nice shorts on Tuesday and Wednesday. KLAC is another one. Intel also broke down. So, looking for a turn on some of these, didn't get it. So, this gives you an idea how funky this market can get. Coupa Software, this is one I've been talking about down in here. And more recently, you had a Bible gap up after earnings, but it opened high up here and closed low. So it's a slider, okay? And then you tested the low and dipped below it a couple days later on Friday, and you turned back above that low and you're hanging in there. Does it become viable? Well, you could treat it as a viable gap up using this low here, which is at 75.27, and you closed Friday at 78.01. So not too far away, but you'd probably like to buy it as close to this low at 75.27 as possible. So just looking through some of these other names. I looked at Splunk, Coupa. IAC, interestingly, had a pocket pivot on Friday, and everybody knows IAC. Some pretty good earnings, I think. But hanging along the 10-day line, it seems more like it's one to keep an eye on and put on your watch list for pullbacks to the 20-day line. So, Yelp, it's been floundering around since it had a Bible gap up. But here's the low of the Bible gap. But it held it on this pullback, and now you're pulling into the 20-day line. This is a pocket pivot. So you could treat that as a pocket pivot, but I'd use the 20-day line as a tight stop. So something of a turnaround attempt here with the stock, because if we look at it in a long term, it's really way down from its lows, but it's trying to come out of this long consolidation, and maybe it can do that. I don't know. We'll see. But it is one name that hit my radar this weekend. Atlassian, I consider this one IT services held the 20-day line, so that may become support for the stock. It's been strong. I've talked about it as being viable along this 10-day line and the very tight consolidation here, and it's gone higher. So now you're getting a pullback. Add down to the 20 line. That looks okay. Planet Fitness doesn't really want to go anywhere, but here we are in a second test of the 50-day line, or coming down into the lows of this structure here, undercutting slightly. Maybe it's viable. This would be a 5-day pocket pivot signature, but it's just below the 20-day line. So still just hanging in this sort of base above this structure here, but in a lower risk area where you might use the lows of the range here as your selling guide. So if this day is below here is 49.49, and we closed Friday at 50.36, then you could treat that as an undercut and rally and use this low here at 49.49 as your selling guide. Qualcomm had a pocket pivot volume signature on Friday. I thought that was interesting because I guess some of their business is related to Apple and China and whatnot, and it's actually acting okay. But it's extended in my view. I think I talked about it down in here when you had a pocket pivot along the 10-day line and steadily moved higher. So it's one that's acting well. So my point is simply that you're getting some stocks that act well, even in the midst of all this nuttiness. Norfolk Southern, that's a new closing high. CSX, the other railroad that we have been watching lately, is pulling down just below its 20-day line. So that's sort of running out of gas. But I mean, this has been an excruciating trend to the upside that now it's starting to just kind of roll over, and I'm not really quite sure about that. I think if I owned it from back here, if it can't hold the 20-day line, you might be out of it. So just wanted to comment on that. Carbon black is interesting because remember I talked about this one on this pullback here. You had the big run up, you came in, your volume dried up here. Now you're back above the 50-day line. You're sitting right on top of it, and volume dried up to minus 50.7 over here. So you're in a low risk entry position with this thing. And your low on the day was 24.19. The 50-day is at 23.72, and you close at 24.27. So I think you're within buying range using the 50-day line as your selling guide. Now, Chinese names have been beaten to a pulp, and they all just look terrible. Momo is probably the best one of them all, and you had a pullback to the 50-day line on Friday, and it held. So I think that's really where you want to be taking a shot at this, if you want to be taking a shot at this at all. If it breaks the 50-day line, then I think it morphs into a short. But so far, if you're finding support at the 50-day line, then you're still in play after this pretty sharp run up off the lows and the 200-day line. So I'd be, you could just watch this. I mean, the whole group, if something nice happens, and Trump makes nice with the Chinese, and they decide to hold off on all the tariffs and make up and kiss and whatever else they want to do, then maybe you see all the Chinese names just launch. And in that case, you just throw a dart, and whatever you buy will go higher. Pot stocks have been hot, and I think GW Pharma gets some benefit from that, sitting right at the 50-day line. It broke below it on Thursday, so volume is not terribly heavy on the sell-off, but it can be volatile, so just kind of watching this along here. Billy is another Chinese name. Now this has filled the gap, and I'm looking at some of these like Huya and IQ, and I'm trying to give some coherency to the patterns and just kind of figure out what's going on here and whether there's anything even remotely setting up. So the only thing I can see here is that you have a gap, and the highs here are 1177, and the stock closed at 1171. So if you push above 1177, you're coming back up through the gap, and if you get above the 20-day line, that would provide a little better measure of support there. So that's something to watch for as a gap fill. So you're looking at it now as a gap fill, and see if it can pop out of here. But again, we'll see what happens. I don't think these names like Momo or Billy are really going to be affected by tariffs. The issue is the Chinese market. And as I've talked about already several times, the China large cap shares ETF, the FXI, which is a good proxy for the Chinese market, is trying to break out to lower lows. And this has to be watched. So with the futures roughly flat, I think you're up 6. Last time we looked, you're up 6 or 7 on the, well, now you're up 10 on the NASDAQ. That's not very much, really. See what happens when the Asian markets open up later this evening. I think they're starting to open up, and the Chinese markets open up at 6:30 Pacific time, my time, and 9:30 Eastern time. So, things to watch for. This one's a little bit of a blast from the past, but it's starting to hit my radar again. Shift Pixie. Now we know that the gig economy, where people are moving around and doing short-term jobs and things like that, in a situation where employers are having a hard time finding workers, this may come more into play. They doubled their revenues in their last earnings report, so that's looking a little better. But we've had several. You can see here you have these big gap up moves, 1, 2, and now you have the third one here. All right, let's big gap ups and then runs to the upside, where the stock doubles in like 3 days. But now you've done it again here more recently. But the pattern looks a little more coherent in terms of the way it's setting up along these lows. It got real tight along the lows in here. And I think this is one to watch. It's a $3.50 stock, so it's kind of junk, but maybe something to keep an eye on and just keep on one of your watch lists to see where this goes, because I think they're in the right space. It's just a question of executing and really moving into the space and being able to expand and take advantage of what many see as the continuing shift towards a gig economy, and that this is going to become really the future. I mean, a lot of people talk about what's going to become the future, but we'll see on this one. Who knows? Maybe it's going to be the next Funko. Funko, I kind of say that in jest, but Funko doesn't know how to build a base. It just keeps going. The last base it built was the one I talked about back at $8 way back in April, if you guys remember, and I know a number of you have bought this stock and it continues to go higher. I don't see any reason to sell it. Maybe if the market breaks down and we go into a deep correction, you're going to get a sell-off and some sort of base building process, meaningful base building process, and I think at some point that has to happen. But so far it hasn't. So it just continues to trend higher, and if you own it down at $8, what do you have to worry about? Use the 10-day or the 20-day line as your trailing stop or selling guide, because it has shown a very strong tendency to hold the 20-day line, that's the green line here, all the way up. So that's acting well. So you could come in and build a base, give the 50 days some time to catch up, and maybe that happens here, or maybe it just keeps going. Who knows? But it's quite an amazing stock, a great story, a very fun stock. And I'm glad to hear that a number of you have bought this stock somewhere. Even if you were a little bit late to it, you're getting a good gain on it at this point. But I think it needs to build a base at some point and set up again. But you'll notice it is growing up. It trades 800,000 shares a day. When I was first talking about it, it was barely trading just under 200,000, and it's matured to a large extent. And in terms of dollar volume, that's significantly more than it was trading back when it was at 8. So some interesting stuff, but it's just kind of one of those weekends where I see a lot of things kind of setting up, so I can put some things on my watch list, but I'm not really sure where this market's going. I think you're subject to news, and they can pull the rug out on you on any moment, so you got to be alert. But I think you need to be aware of where things are still acting okay and setting up, and make your short watch lists from that. Anyways, that's all I've got for now. You guys have a great rest of your Sunday, and we'll catch you later this week. Take care.